The other thing is that the idea of Christian Zionism does completely erase the existence of Palestinian Christians, right? There's no space for a Palestinian Christian, because if Israel growing means Palestine disappearing, that means they wouldn't say like, oh, so let's get rid of the Christians in Palestine. For them, we don't exist. So saying that I exist and, asserting the existence of my family is also another way in which I feel like I can have those conversations with people, and they can start thinking like a little bit deeper about, okay, so if Christians do exist, then maybe that is the one string that can then Palestinian Christians, that's the one string that can unravel this like toxic theology that has led to so much pain.
Friends, welcome back to Across the Divide. In this episode, I have a conversation with Yasmina Haddad, who is the communications specialist for the Palestine Justice Network of the Presbyterian Church, USA. She's the granddaughter of a Palestinian refugee and the daughter of a Lebanese and Colombian immigrants to the US. So she's a Palestinian, Lebanese, and Colombian. Through these identities, she centers the Middle East and Latin America in her worldview and her work here in the US. Yasmina is currently a PhD student at the University of Wisconsin, Madison, and she is pursuing a degree in educational policy studies. Her research focuses on the intersection of education, migration, and language. In this conversation, as you will see, we discuss her fascinating background as being a Latina, who's also a Palestinian, who's also a Lebanese, and how those identities merge in a beautiful way in her story and how she understands herself. We also discuss the impact of her trip to Palestine recently before the war broke out and the formative role that trip played in shaping her vocation and her identity right now in the work that she is doing. And we discuss, I think, an important issue, which is how to do advocacy in church spaces. As I said, Yasmina works in the Presbyterian Church USA, and she finds in the church, at least in her church community, a healthy space for that work. So this could be a very interesting and hopefully encouraging conversation for those of us who want to focus their energy in their church communities, in advocating for the end of the war, and also in general, advocating for peace and justice in Palestine and Israel. This is a really important conversation, and I hope you enjoy it. Here's my conversation with Yasmina Haddad. Yasmina, welcome to Across the Divide.
Hello, Daniel. Thanks for having me.
It's a pleasure. I have a mutual friend connected us, and he was like, his name is Jeff, and Jeff was like, you need to interview Yasmina. She is brilliant, and she's doing important work, and she's got a fascinating story to tell. So I'm like, okay, well, I need to talk to Yasmina. So welcome. I'm so glad you're here with us in this conversation. I'm very interested in this conversation. We're going to talk about faith and advocacy. This is a very interesting conversation for a lot of people because there are many Christians who struggle with action, with advocacy, especially in Palestine. It's kind of easy to talk about other things like pro-life issues or sex trafficking. But Palestine continues to be a very touchy and very sensitive and confusing issue for a lot of people. So I'm very excited for this conversation we're going to have together. But before we have that conversation, and as the audience will find out, you have a very fascinating background and a story and a lot of identities. So just for the audience, for my curiosity as well, can you tell us a bit about yourself and your background?
Yes, of course. I feel like I'm supposed to have figured out what all these identities look like in one, but I'm still very much on that journey. But I would love to explain kind of where I come from. My mother was born and raised in Bogota, Colombia, and she came to the U.S. when she was in her mid-20s to study dentistry. Her grandfather happened to be a Lebanese immigrant from Lebanon. So during the Ottoman Empire, he left Lebanon, he went to Colombia, and that's when he met my great-grandmother and then had my grandfather and then my mom. So my mom grew up in Colombia with this goofy grandpa who had a funny accent who was from Lebanon. So that's kind of where my mom comes from. And my dad was born and raised in Beirut, Lebanon. He also came to the U.S. in his mid-20s for residency. And he is one of 6 kids. His father is Lebanese, like I think my jiddo side of the family was like rooted in Lebanon before there were even borders around Lebanon. My grandmother was a Palestinian refugee. So my grandmother, in April 1948, was forcibly removed from Jerusalem. The family went to Nablus and kind of waited there for, everybody was being told it'd be 2 weeks. They waited there for, let's say, 2 weeks. And then after they realized it wasn't going to get better, they moved on to Jordan. My grandma, she's my teta Aida, she ended up wanting to become a nurse. And to become a nurse, she went to Beirut, Lebanon, which is where she met my grandfather. But both of my parents met in Iowa, and I was born and raised in Indiana. So you tell me what that means, because
Nice.
I'm still trying to figure that one out.
All right, let's unpack some of the stuff you said. So going to your dad's side, Lebanese
Yes.
who migrated from Lebanon during the Ottoman times. So I'm guessing this is late 19th century, early 20th century. That's when was
Yes.
a massive movement of Lebanese people into Latin America.
On my mom's side.
This is from your mom's side, right? Right. So
Yes.
your mom is a Latina, Lebanese Latina, and that's
Yes.
kind of, you have that aspect of your identity. And now from your dad's side, Lebanese and Palestinian. And the Palestinian is a refugee from 48. The family moved from
Yes.
48 to Jordan, to Lebanon. Is that
Yes.
it? Okay.
Yeah, that was great.
That's not too bad. Okay.
No.
So it's interesting that your grandma was from Jerusalem, because
Yes.
you think that in 48 they didn't make it all the way to Jerusalem. Do you know the story there?
Yeah, actually, I do. So my grandma originally, she's from the Nasser family from Birzeit. So my family originally, like if you go back, and I still have
this
relatives.
Is a small village at the time by Ramallah, another city in the West Bank.
Yes, yes. My family had a big part in starting Birzeit University, which is one of the renowned universities in the West Bank. But my great grandfather, so her father was a policeman So he worked closely with the British. That is something else that I think about a lot. And what happened was when they were in Jerusalem, it was about a 2-week notice, right? Because the Nakba, as we know it, was in mid-May. But the British told my great grandfather, like, things are going to get bad. I would leave for 2 weeks. Take your family, go take a vacation, leave, and then we'll see what happens. And so that's kind of why my family, one, left early, and two, was based in Jerusalem. So my grandma was actually born in Nablus. But when we talk about my family, we say we're Nassers from Birzeit.
Yeah, I mean, that tells a lot about the Palestinian history. Also, people probably don't know this, Nassar is a well-known Christian family.
Yes.
And this is what the Nakba, when we talk about the Nakba, the catastrophe for 1948, we're talking about a real serious devastation of the Christian communities in Palestine, especially because you're a minority. So whatever happens is going to affect the minorities way more than the majority. But also this is the issue with what the Nakba did to the thriving, beautiful Christian communities that, as you can say, from Jerusalem, from Ramallah, from Birzeit, from Nablus, so very rich and diverse and mobile in society or community, but now that's been all kind of eradicated, right?
Yes. And it's kind of interesting, right? Because the nuance becomes a lot of the Palestinians in the diaspora, not a lot, but there's a fair share of Christians who are in the Palestinian diaspora. Because at the time, the Palestinian Christian community did have a certain level of privilege, and they had the money. So my family didn't spend a day in a refugee camp. They went from Jerusalem to Nablus, where they stayed at a church, then to Jordan, where they stayed with a family friend. So there was a lot of privilege around my family, and the reason why my family was able to leave when they did.
So there's a bit of a family wealth that they were able to take advantage of, and probably
which Christians tend to have.
Right, and probably maybe a second language, maybe English or otherwise. Maybe they were taught by the British during the mandate. Yeah, that highlights an interesting dynamic too, that the mobility and the affluence of the Christian Palestinian community, and thus, despite their suffering, there's a bit of access and mobility that they had that many of the Muslim Palestinians, the majority of those who suffered, did not really have, and many of them, the majority of them, are still stuck today. Which people forget about this. You have today refugees in refugee camps, whether in Jordan, in Syria, in Lebanon, today you have 3 generations, even 4 generations of refugees who are still stateless from 1948. But your family kind of lucked out in a way because of perhaps some affluence, some kind of resources that they kind of were able to stay out of the refugee camp.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Even though there are still many Christian refugees, especially in Lebanon, right?
Yes.
A few Christian communities there, Palestinian Christian refugees, still stuck in refugee camps in Lebanon as well.
Mm-hmm.
So now
Yes.
eventually your parents moved to the US, well, separately, and then they met. So now you are an American as well. So there's all these, maybe, I don't know if they're conflicting or not, but fascinating kind of backgrounds. Like, how much does the Latin identity play a role in who you are, and how much the Lebanese, how much the Palestinian, and also how do all of these identities, which are in the American context minority identities, and especially now with the current political reality, it might be a bit tense for you. So yeah, I'm kind of curious, how do you navigate all of that? And especially because you're also an American. So how do you
Mm-hmm.
make that work?
Yeah, no, it's complicated, and I think it will continue to be for the rest of my life. So I need to continue to reflect on it. So in terms of my Hispanic Latina side, my family, what drew my mom to my dad initially was that my dad was this random Lebanese man who spoke Spanish fluently. And he spoke Spanish with an Arab accent like her grandfather did. So that like was a very big draw for my mom. And so my parents continue to speak Spanish throughout their entire relationship. To this day, they primarily communicate in Spanish. Another
But wait,
fact,
hold on. How did your dad learn Spanish?
he just did, so Lebanon has is a lot of, is a rich language culture, right? So a lot of people there speak English, Arabic, and French. So by the time my dad was in college, he spoke all 3 of those. And then he started going to the Spanish embassy to take Spanish
Oh,
lessons
interesting.
because
Okay,
he just
random.
loves languages. Yeah.
Sure, sure, sure. Okay, carry on.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So Spanish was a big part of my life. And so that always really informed a lot of how we presented outwardly, especially the people who didn't know that my name, even Haddad was such an obviously Lebanese name, that didn't really speak to people in Indiana, right? So Spanish was a big part of my life. And additionally, Colombia is not nearly as linguistically diverse as Lebanon. So my Colombian family, my grandparents in particular, don't speak English. So Spanish was very, very important in my household. Whereas my Lebanese family spoke English fluently. And so even though we would go there every summer and my mom would be like, only speak to my kids in Arabic, the English, French, Arabic mix would come out, and we'd come home from a month in Lebanon speaking English with an Arab accent, as opposed to speaking Arabic. So
with a French Arabic accent.
Exactly, right. So thank you in Arabic is merci, which is
right, yeah.
thank you in French with an Arab accent.
Right.
Yeah. So I think that was kind of the first way that people noticed that my family was different, was that we were Spanish speakers. And then it was kind of from there that like other identities would start to unfold. And of course, I was reflecting today actually about 9/11 and then the world that we ended up growing up in post 9/11 in the US. And that's when all of a sudden people realized we were Arab. And it wasn't necessarily in a good way, right? They talk about Arabs in the US going from having been hyper invisible prior to being hyper visible afterwards. So we were in a Catholic school at the time because my mom was raised Catholic. And we had been at that school for years. And right after the 9/11 happened, somebody at my school went up to my mom and was like, I'm so sorry I've been feeding your Muslim kids pork. And my mom was like, you mean my kids who sat next to your kids at First Communion? We're not Muslim, but okay. So anyway, so I started realizing that, like, I think the Arabness started coming out in that way. And I mean, to this day, I get questions like that, but anyway, from people in Indiana. But anyways, so I think that I started to feel like kind of seeing those two identities exist in many ways. I always say, like, I never feel as Lebanese as I do as when I'm in Colombia. And I never feel as Colombian as I do as when I'm in Lebanon. Because I feel the clash of the cultures. And in the US, I think sometimes I'm considered a very safe minority. Sometimes people can like convince themselves that this girl's from Indiana. Maybe her grandfather was from Ireland. People can
Yeah,
kind of find ways
you
in their
you can
head.
be white passing. You can appear like as a white
Exactly.
person, right? Yes.
Yeah.
And then how does the Palestinian identity kind of fit in here?
Yeah, so there's like all this crazy stuff. When my dad was in Iowa studying, he saw an ad for a band called Salam, and the lead of the band called Salam was somebody named Raja Hanania. And my
Okay,
dad
these are all
knew that.
Christian names, by the way. Salam is Arabic for peace, but Raja
Yes,
Hananiya is a well-known Christian name. Okay, go ahead.
yes.
Keep going.
And so my dad knew that his grandmother's last name was Hanania before she got married. And he was like, there's a world in which I'm related to this man. So he goes to the concert. Sure enough, Raja Hanania was the first cousin of my grandma. So that then became part of our U.S. community, was my uncle, Amoraja, who was born and raised in Nazareth, and then at 18 left and came to the U.S. to study. And he has his own story. So I grew up with the stories of hearing, how his ID was taken away by some foreigner at the border because they said, you have a U.S. ID, so that let me just take your Palestinian one. You don't need this anymore. And now he has no papers to tie himself to Palestine. So I always kind of grew up with those stories um, being told. We grew up going to protests and things like that. Um, but I never really quite understood my family's connection to the whole struggle. I just kind of understood that, like, as Arabs, this is what we care about. We care about each other, and we know that our siblings aren't. My uncle has these stories, and so we know that we must be engaged in this issue. And then it was about in college when I started hearing conversations around Palestine that started coming up, and I was like, okay, I know that's not true. I know what you're saying is not true. I went to school in Nashville, Tennessee, so you can imagine kind of the discourse that was surrounding me. And that's when I started asking more questions to my family and to my grandma. And I still had my great grandma at the time. So questions started abounding in that sense.
Church at the Crossroads is a unique conference. It brings together Palestinian and American Christians for a time of fellowship, reflection, and action. It comes as a response to the pleas of Palestinian Christians who have been asking their siblings in North America, and especially in the US, to pay attention to what's happening in Gaza, to take a stand for justice and for peace, especially in light of the destruction and desolation of the people of Gaza. Also, especially because of so many Christians have been very quiet and even complicit in the suffering of the Palestinians over 77 years, and also have used the scriptures, our faith, to justify that suffering, to turn a blind eye to the plight of the Palestinians, and also justify what's happening using the faith, using our scriptures and our Christianity. So this is a time for reflection and action. It's a time to take a stand. So come and join us at this, I think, consequential gathering for the church right now. As we have been saying, Gaza has revealed a sort of a theological crisis, and we need to respond appropriately. Across the Divide is one of the conveners of this conference, and we would love to see you there at this gathering. If you haven't registered yet, do so. And when you do, use the coupon ATD, which gives you a 10% discount on your registration fees. So come and join us for this important gathering, and let's do this work together, this hard work of justice and of peacemaking in Palestine and in Israel. See you there. I mean, I'm guessing the last 2 years kind of been very impactful to you. And I don't know how you now maybe feel more Palestinian than ever, perhaps.
Yeah.
Yeah. What's happening there? Like,
Yes.
how are you? How have you been relating to the events of October 7 and what followed?
Yeah. I mean, so I think like we can all agree here that it didn't start on October 7. And so neither did my journey with my um, kind of getting to know my Palestinian heritage because so going to Palestine has always been something that we wanted to do because my great grandma, so my grandma's mom, my Teta Ivo is what I called her. Her name was Evelyn. Um, she lived with my grandparents in Lebanon. So, and she lived until she was 104. So I lived with her stories. She was always telling me things that like I would just hear and repeat, but never really process, right? Like her family, the Hananias in Jerusalem, they were in charge of the Greek Orthodox part of the Church of the Holy Sepulchre. So every Sunday she'd go and she'd clean the church and the Greek Orthodox section of the church. She used to tell me she went to this school and she's fluent in German because she went to a school called Schmitz Girls School. And she would always tell me it's outside of Damascus Gate. And so these are things that like I always knew in my mind and I always wanted to see. You know, I had so many friends in college, particularly Jewish friends, who would tell me stories of their times in Jerusalem, you know, and I would always say like, did you see the Church of the Holy Sepulchre? Did you see Schmitz Girls School? That's connected to my family. And they were like, yeah, we loved it. You should go. And I was like, and then that begs the question, like, what does it mean to go when you are a descendant of somebody who was in exile? Because my grandmother and my great grandmother, everybody from that family, none of them were able to return, even to visit. And so I think we kind of had an unspoken agreement in my family. You know, my grandma had 6 kids, now has 14 grandkids. And we were all kind of like, listen, I don't think we want to go while Teta is still alive unless she's been back or until we know she'll never go back. So I always had this interest in my mind. And then in August 2022, my Teta passed away. Allah yarhamha. And that was it. That was it for me. I was like, oh, I'm going. I don't know how, but I'm going now because my grandma just died in exile. And I know that there's something there that my family has the right to connect more to than we've been able to as of right now. So actually that November, I went on a trip with my church, with an ecumenical group through Sibil, the theological group. And that was
Sabil
my first time.
is a liberation theology center in Jerusalem, founded by Naim Atik, a Palestinian priest. Good.
Yes, thank you. That was my first time. So I was the first one to go back. You know, my grandma was kicked out I think she was about 12 years old on April 27, and her granddaughter went back it was November 27, 2022. And when I was there, I also knew I had family. So I started like finding the numbers of these distant relatives that I had heard of. So we would be places and like stops in this tour that they would do. And I was the only like person of Palestinian or Arab descent. So we'd go places and then a car would like pull up and be like, I'm looking for Yasmina Haddad. And I was like, oh, I'm supposed to go with them. And it was my grandma's first cousin who lives in Birzeit. So they took me to Birzeit and they showed me around Birzeit, you know. One of the other founders of the Sabil Theological Center is Samia Nasser Khoury. She's also a cousin of my grandma. So I went and I spent an evening in her house. I spent an evening with my other great aunt in Ramallah, who was actually randomly, 30 years prior at my parents' wedding in Canada. And I started learning and I was like, oh my gosh, like this is family. This is my family. This is what I know Lebanon to be. But I've never been here before. And I've never been allowed. I've never come before, you know? And then my family also has ties to somebody who was a famous poet, a famous Palestinian poet. His name was Kamal Nasser. And Kamal Nasser is really well known. He ended up becoming the spokesperson for the Palestinian Liberation Organization before he was assassinated in Beirut. And so I would mention that to people like, oh yeah, I'm descendant of the Nasser, the Kamal Nasser. And people were taking photos with me. And I was like, this is amazing. And all of that, like 14 days of being there, and I left and I was like, oh, this is what they've taken away from us. And this is why I can and I need to say that I'm Palestinian when people ask me. Because if I don't, then they win, right? They wanted my family to be removed in 48 and they wanted us to forget. And going there made me realize like, but we refuse. Collectively, we refused. And so that is why, and this was in 2022, before October 7th, right? So I came back with this. First of all, absolutely shocked at the conditions under which my family was living, the conditions under which I was that I was treated as an Arab. They saw my name, but they even saw my face and they knew I was an Arab there. And so I was harassed at the airport. I was harassed in Hebron. I was harassed at any checkpoint we went to. And so I came back, first and foremost, just distraught. But I also was like, okay, like I saw it. I know what happens there, and I know my family's ties. And like khalas in Arabic means done. No one can change my mind. I'm Palestinian, and this is something that I need to dedicate a lot of my time and energy to.
Wow. Yeah, I get it. It's incredible how attached we are to the land, and even here for me as a Palestinian in diaspora as well. I mean, I grew up in Palestine, so it's a bit different, but I'm way more Palestinian here than I am in Palestine.
Mm-hmm.
But I think there's this kind of sense of identity that I'm attached to. There's kind of belonging to the land that I think is very foreign to people in the West. They don't have that attachment to landedness, to that a place that you call home. Home is like wherever you have your house, right? Wherever you have your family around you. You don't have that belonging to this something that is lost, and especially because that identity, that home, is being robbed slowly from us. So there's this. Our hearts are kind of oriented towards that return, that kind of staying there and always being there. So that kind of resonates heavily with me.
I was going to say, before I left for Palestine, I asked my dad. My dad is this like goofy Lebanese man, like he just is always laughing. And I asked my dad, I was like, Dad, what do you want from Palestine? Like, I can get you soap from Nablus. I hear Ramallah has good ice cream. I was kind of joking, like, what do you want from Palestine? And he said, you know what, Yasmina? If you could bring me back some dirt, like just a water bottle full would be enough. Because if I can never go to my mom's home, at least let me touch it.
Yeah. So and you did, and you brought him some dirt from Palestine.
Yeah.
Wow. Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's beautiful. I want to go back to something you mentioned. I don't know what the audience is thinking, but I need to ask you this question. Your grandma had the chance to go back to Palestine, I'm assuming, but she didn't want to, and you had to wait until she passed away. What is happening there? If that's her home, why didn't she go back?
Mm-hmm. So my grandmother technically never did, because she then became a Lebanese citizen, and the Lebanese are still not allowed technically to go to Palestine
because of the occupation.
But she does have a brother who lives in the U.S. in Houston, and he is a U.S. citizen, and he could go back. If he wanted to, he has the right, because he's a U.S. citizen, to go back. And he hasn't yet, and I don't think he will. I think he's done traveling. He's in his late 80s at this point. And I think it's because it's just heartbreaking, And I came back and I realized that too. Even my dad could go. If he wanted to hop on a plane tomorrow, he could go. But go to what? Go to an airport where they ask you, what's your father's name? What's your grandfather's name? Those are Arab names. Step to the side. Go somewhere where they push his daughter. They were like, why is your hair not covered? Why are you so close to a mosque? I think that they're very scared of the pain, and that it's very, very hard for them to understand. And I can respect that. The depths of the joy that they could feel if they were to go. So I'm not sure why, and I could always dig further, but I think it's like, my dad lived through the Lebanese Civil War. My great uncle lived through the Nakba. Like they're done putting themselves in the place of that kind of pain and mistreatment, that I don't think that they're interested in having to fight. And so my dad always says, like, he'll go when Palestine is free, he'll go. But until then, he doesn't want to. And before I left, I was like, suck it up, go, But then I went and I was like, wow, like, I get it. Because I still cry thinking about some of the things that happened to me while I was there, and some of the things my family members told me while I was there. So I get it.
Yeah, this is hard, and I get it. There's a layered trauma that so many Palestinians carry, just layers and layers of that. And to go there as a Palestinian, but to go as a tourist to your homeland.
Exactly.
And not having the chance to be a citizen, to reclaim that identity, to reclaim that your place in that land. It's very hard. I
Hmm.
totally I get it. Something that is different for me because I have my ID and I can go. But it's a for just for context, it's a real phenomenon among many Palestinians in diaspora that it's very hard for them to conceive of going to Palestine during the occupation. There's such like grief and trauma that just stops them. Um, and part of it, and I totally get it, but also, I mean, that's how Israel has been able to maintain that hegemony and control and domination, because they have successfully created this environment where Palestinians cannot go. And even if they go, they would go as tourists. But if they go, they would be traumatized and they don't want to go again. Um, so it's that wound, that open wound of the Palestinian people is real. And the story of your family kind of reveals that for us. Um, by the way, I don't know. This is a shameless plug, Yasmina, and kind of bear with me. But I don't know like what you're saying about Palestine and your experience in the West Bank, at least in Nablus and Ramallah and Bethlehem. This is an experience that people can have. We are taking a delegation from our listeners who are interested. We're taking them to Palestine next May. I don't know if you've heard the news, friends,
Wow.
but if you haven't, be on the lookout. We're planning a trip to Palestine next May especially for the Christ at the Checkpoint conference happening in Bethlehem. So we're gonna take a delegation with us to Palestine. So
Yes, go.
if what Yasmin is saying is kind of tantalizing, good. We want you to be there and to see what Palestine is like, with the joys. There's so much joy, so much happiness, but also the hardship and the grief that exists there as well.
Hmm.
Okay. Well, Yasmin, I want to kind of pivot to talk about the work you're doing right now. I think your trip in 2022 was very formative for you to you kind of were able to reclaim your identity as a Palestinian Latina, Palestinian American Latina, Colombian Lebanese person. So what have you been doing? Kind of what is the work you have been doing through your church? Again, I think the audience would be interested in that, in the work you're doing.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, I think when I came back from Palestine, my first question became like, what do I do next? Like, where can I do work and where can I do it that it'll feel on some level impactful? And the answer that always kept on coming back to me was my church. So my family, again, Christian from both sides, Catholic, my mom's side, we have a Greek Orthodox, but also Protestant lineage on my dad's side. And so my family has been an active member, and I've been going to a Presbyterian church my entire life. So Presbyterian Church USA. Um, and I knew that our church had done good work in the past, and that's like an understatement. The Presbyterian Church USA was one of the first, back in 2004, to start making these statements and denouncing, and we divested from 3 companies that supported the violent occupation of Palestine in 2014. So that was 11 years ago. Um, and I knew that, like, so if I was going to pick a place to do my advocacy, where would it be? And you think about the options here, and one of them is like being out there at the protests and like leading the chants and things like that. And I don't have that in me. After coming back from Palestine, I don't have that in me. I get very anxious. And I think that's okay. Like, I think that that's something that I also want everybody to understand. Like, being at the front of the protest isn't a place where everybody needs to be, especially not this Arab, Latina, whatever I am, because it just wasn't a place that I felt comfortable, and it wasn't the place that I felt like I was able to make the most impact. But my church has a group called the Palestine Justice Network of the Presbyterian Church USA, and so I became more active with them. And through that, I've been able to engage with the largest group of Zionists in the U.S., which are the Christian Zionists. Right? The Christian Zionists are the ones, and I will say this until kingdom come, pushing this narrative in the US, and it's Christian Zionism that is the fuel behind the US's unconditional support for the Israeli apartheid regime. So if I think about people who I can engage with, I mean, if I walk up to a Christian Zionist and I say, I'm Christian and I'm Palestinian, I mean, immediately any argument they have falls apart, right? Which I think is a very powerful thing. So I decided that that's where I wanted to invest a lot of my time and energy, is kind of understanding better, but also counteracting Christian Zionism in the US. And then I've done that through my church. My church is such that It's actually interesting. The US government was shaped after the way that the Presbyterian Church works. We're very bottom up. Every 2 years we have a General Assembly. Every Presbyterian in the country sends delegates. They have committees where they discuss overtures. Then they go to something called the General Assembly. And then as a church as a whole, we vote on things. So no decision comes out of the Presbyterian Church USA without say from the people who are part of the church. It's not like the Catholic Church where the Pope can say something and all of a sudden the doctrine has changed. No, we divested from those companies because the church voted to divest, not because somebody at top just happened to be particularly progressive at the moment. And I think that that's very powerful for me. So currently I'm on the steering committee of the Palestine Justice Network of the Presbyterian Church USA. And I also am the communications person. So if you follow us on Instagram, that's me posting behind the scenes. But it also just gives me a way to like really feel like I can have a hand in what's going on, and also not have to worry about the anxieties of the implications of being an Arab who is so out there in such a way that might make me feel unsafe.
Tell us more about your countering of Christian Zionism. By the way, we ran a 10-episode series on Christian Zionism here at the podcast. Really, I think was a really fantastic series. But what did that, or what does that look like for you to counter and confront Christian Zionists in the U.S.?
Yeah, so I think the first thing that hits me when I think about Christian Zionism is the idea that it, in and of itself, is anti-Semitic. The beliefs that Christian Zionism is built upon is that they want to rebuild Israel to what it used to be. They reference a Bible verse, and back when Israel's what it used to be, that's when Jesus will come. So they want to funnel money in, and they want everybody in Israel to be so happy and fruitful just for Jesus to come, for only Christians and only that type of Christian to be saved. So that doesn't include Jewish people. That doesn't include Muslims. That doesn't include Christians who don't believe what they believe. So it's very selective. It's like this very like ulterior motive-esque. So first and foremost, I feel very passionate about talking about how it is very anti-Semitic. It's very Islamophobic. It's very xenophobic. And so anything with Christian on it shouldn't be that. That's not who we are. So in that sense, I try to confront it in that way by educating people on that notion. The other thing is that the idea of Christian Zionism does completely erase the existence of Palestinian Christians, right? There's no space for a Palestinian Christian, because if Israel growing means Palestine disappearing, that means they wouldn't say like, oh, so let's get rid of the Christians in Palestine. For them, we don't exist. So saying that I exist and, asserting the existence of my family is also another way in which I feel like I can have those conversations with people, and they can start thinking like a little bit deeper about, okay, so if Christians do exist, then maybe that is the one string that can then Palestinian Christians, that's the one string that can unravel this like toxic theology that had led to so much pain.
Yeah, I mean, he's right. It's interesting. Yeah, it's not the Christian Zionist support for Israel. It's a means to an end. Like, you are not loving Jewish people for the sake of being a Jewish person, or for the sake of their humanity or their goodness. You're using them as pawns for your apocalyptic vision of destruction and death and war and bloodshed.
Right.
And where the majority of them, if not all of them, would die.
Yeah, exactly.
It's the most fascist and the most violent ideology of all.
Yes, and the government in Israel knows this. It's not lost on them, but it just speaks to this weaponization of religion, that they can use it. They're like, I don't care why, as long as you're putting money in my pockets, I don't care why you're doing it. Like, sure, you can go believe in your apocalypse, but keep on supporting us.
Right.
Mark Rubio, keep on supporting us. Whatever your reason.
I appreciate you highlighting that, and there's a lot more to say about its abuse of the scriptures and weaponization of the text, support for war. There's a lot there to say about Christian Zionism, and it continues to be a very influential position in many churches. But yeah, I think you highlighting your identity is very powerful, and and there's a huge need for people, more and more people, to listen to Palestinian Christians, Lebanese Christians, and everyone else who are doing that work, who are disrupting that very binary and simple narrative about us and them.
Yeah.
How does your faith play a role in that work? Like, how as a Christian woman?
Yeah.
So yeah, you're doing the work. I mean, obviously you're Palestinian, so that there's an inclination towards doing the work. But where's the faith? Where does the faith come in for you?
Yeah. Sometimes, like years ago, somebody asked me, like, why are you a Christian? You know, and it's like, that's such a big question, but it is a very common question in a place like Nashville, Tennessee, where a lot of conversations revolve around your religious identity. And there's a big desire in spaces such as Nashville for people to have this like one coming to Jesus moment. So I think somebody asked me, why do you follow Jesus? Why are you a Christian? And they wanted me to say, like, when I was 15, I saw the light, or I was doing something bad and then I repented, or whatever. But I started thinking about it and I was like, oh, I mean, I think I'm a Christian because my family, after they were forced to move from Jerusalem, they spent their first 2 weeks, what went on to be a lifetime, as refugees in the church where Jesus met the woman at the well.
In Nablus, in
Nablus.
Yeah.
And so who took my family in the first weeks of being refugees? It was a church. And where did my family go for refuge? What was their first instinct? It was a church. And it has continued to be that time and time again. Like in Beirut, my family also had ties to the church there. And my grandma, who was the child when she left, found all of her community in the church. It's not easy. It's also it's not easy being Palestinian in Lebanon either, right? My grandmother was not treated like a queen, even though to me she was. She wasn't. But where did she find refuge? Again, it was the church. It was the women of the church. It was being in the church. And so I see and I feel this like ancestral pull to the church and to what it can bring and to what it means for my family.
If you think the conversations we are having are necessary, then I invite you to consider becoming a monthly Patreon supporter of the podcast on patreon.com/Across the Divide. By sustaining our work, you also get access to various kinds of premium content like extended episode conversations, merch discounts, and private meetings with the hosts of the podcast and other Patreon supporters. So help us to continue growing our small podcast and join the beautiful community of Across the Divide by signing up at patreon.com/Across the Divide. I'm kind of intrigued by the connection you made between Palestine and between queers, queers in church. And there's an interesting phenomenon that gay marriage became culturally acceptable in the church, and it became theologically acceptable in churches, right? So a lot of it, I don't want to say anything negative about PCUSA per se, but there's a connection between the culture and how the church thinks. And it's an interesting kind of awkward dynamic, who influences whom, right? But also when it comes to Palestine, it's interesting now because there could be an inflection point we're going through right now. There's actually awareness about Palestine now. People are being, to use that language, are waking up to the reality, the apartheid, the devastation, the genocide in Gaza. So I'm intrigued to see if that cultural shift that is happening, and it's happening on the left and the right right now, which is very fascinating to observe. So it's interesting to see how much of that cultural dynamic and conversation is going to influence churches on the left and on the right. Because even though the Presbyterian Church USA has been doing the work, broadly speaking, generally speaking, many churches are not doing that work. So it's going to be interesting to see how that is going to shift. But in either way, I think Christians need to step up right now. This is the time for you to step up. And here, so since we're wrapping up right now, kind of what is the word you would give to someone? What's the advice you would give? I don't want to put that pressure on you right now, but how could you, what would you say to that Christian who grew up in a space, perhaps as a Christian Zionist, since October 7, following what's happening in Gaza, have been really activated, they've reread the scriptures again and discovered God's heart for justice and mercy and peacemaking, and is trying to navigate how to move forward, but they're still kind of not finding their footing yet, and they're still kind of struggling, whether it's with their church community, whether with not knowing what to do, or feeling helpless or hopeless and weak. For someone who's been doing the work through your church, like what are some practical, or what kind of advice, practical steps you can give people to think about being proactive and doing that work?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, I think again, the first thing that you have to ask yourself is like, where is my investment with my current church community? Like, is this a place that gives me a lot of other things in my life? Is it a place where I feel welcome, quote unquote, otherwise? Because I also don't necessarily, because what we need is people in those spaces who are feeling what these people are feeling. I don't want everybody to just like, have something that they love the older women at their church, but they feel like for this one reason they must leave. I'm going to be the first one to tell you, I don't think that you have to do that by any means. But if leaving you think is what's best for you and best for your mental health and best for what it is that you're looking for when you go to a church, I would encourage you to then look for churches in your place that do align with that type of belief that you have, which is this heart that's breaking for our Palestinian siblings. And the way that you can do that, again, is just like looking it up. So the United Church of Christ is meeting right now for their General Synod. And them as a church, they just voted like 510 to 13 to say what's happening in Palestine is a genocide and to demand the end to the genocide in Gaza. That is an amazing thing. Like, do you have a UCC church next to you? Last year we had our General Assembly and we divested from Israeli bonds. The first question that should bring in your mind is like, why did the church have money in Israeli bonds? Great question. But the second is that we ended up becoming featured on the Boycott, Divestment, and Sanctions Instagram. And as a communications person, I'm always looking. In the comments on that post about us, people were like, okay, Christians, like this is what Christians need to be doing. Somebody else was like, wow, all of a sudden I want to go to church on Sunday. And somebody else was like, how do I join this group that did this? So I think it takes a little bit of looking. And again, I think Christians for a Free Palestine is a great group to go through first, because they actually do like have different WhatsApp groups for different denominations. If you're part of a denomination that you want to see what's going on in your space. But
and
I
also
think it's just
different regions as well. Also
different regions in the Midwest as well. Yeah, exactly. And so in that way, you can start finding community. Unfortunately, you might be in a place where the only community you can get is virtual. And that's not everything. And that's why I think that it is okay to go to a church that if it gives you other things, you should be there. And maybe the reason why you feel like you should be there is because one day you will change hearts and minds in that place. But it doesn't mean that you should be sacrificing what you need out of church.
The thing is that also for some people, it's going to be hard for them to go to a PCUSA church or a UCC church for different theological reasons, family, ministry for kids in their school that they really enjoy, kind of connection to that community. So switching churches would be hard, but then the advice would be, well, if you are committed to your church community, then what does your work look like over there? How much influence can you have? And what can you do to have that influence? And if you don't have it, how can you grow that influence in that church?
Yeah. And there's enough of a community that exists that we can support each other. If you join us virtually, we can send resources. We can help. Like, it's not you're not alone by any means. Even though you might feel alone in that one church that otherwise gives you whatever it is that you need or you want.
Right. Well, hey, Yasmina, there's something else that people can do, which is to go and attend a conference that is happening in September. It's called the Church at the Crossroads, happening in Glen Ellen. I would love to see you there if you are coming. I don't know if you know about it or not, but we'll talk about it later. But if not, you should come, and the audience know about the conference. They just heard an ad about the conference in this episode.
Oh, perfect.
So it's a conference that is meant for Christians to come in conversation and fellowship, but also to a place for reflection and action to figure out what it means to be a faithful Christian in this moment. So that's church@thecrossroads.com. So that's one other way people can be involved in this work as well.
One of the big ministries from the Palestine Justice Network is called the Hosanna Preaching Project. It will be hosted in Madison, Wisconsin in November. And it is, so for example, maybe you lead a church that you don't feel understands this the way that you do. That is like a 1-day workshop here in Madison, Wisconsin that you can go to, and every year it's in different places, where they can support you to find out how you can speak about Palestine from the pulpit. So things like this exist. And I think that that's what's really special, is like we can't forget about that.
Yeah, there are a lot of resources. Yeah, that's a really cool project as well. In November. Yeah. Well, Yasmina, thank you so much for your time. I really enjoyed this. You have a very fascinating story, and I'm so glad we got to listen to that. But also, I think a very important work you're doing through the church. And hopefully this would be a rally cry for a lot of Christians who are listening to figure out, well, hey, maybe there's something I need to be doing. I need to be more focused and organized and energized to do that work, and maybe not give up hope on maybe some kind of transformation or change in my local church community. Yasmina, thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you so much. I really enjoyed being here.
Thanks for tuning in to this episode of Across the Divide. We are so grateful for your support and interest. The hosts of this podcast are Daniel Bannoura, Jennifer Madrand, and myself, Abir Shhali. Salim Anfous is our producer. Our theme music is composed by Charlie Rishmawi. To help sustain the work of this podcast, please consider becoming a financial supporter of Across the Divide. Any donation amount makes a difference, and with a donation of as little as $5 a month, you will gain access to exclusive supporter-only content. Go to patreon.com/acrossthedivide to learn more and donate. For any feedback or suggestions, connect with us on Instagram @Across the Divide Podcast. Until next time, stay curious, stay passionate, stay engaged, and join us again on Across the Divide.